Hey, Mike here. So in this video, we are going to try out two different AI programmers. So I'm going to name this GPT Engineer versus Aider. The way that we are going about this competition is seeing which one can create the best Pomodoro app. From here, let's create a new environment, and now we can enter the environment. I have this aliased to ECE, which means enter current environment. Pip install GPT Engineer. Make sure when you're installing the Aider portion, it's pip install aider-chat. And now one thing that I always do to make sure that I'm using the environments version of the binary is instead of running GPT Engineer, I run the entire command env -bin or / and GPT Engineer. So this way I know that we are using the correct binary. So the first thing that happens whenever you run GPT Engineer is that it creates a new directory within whatever directory you are running it out of. As you can see, it created the project/example because we don't have any prompt file, which you will see in just a moment, for GPT Engineer to reference from. Now, because it doesn't have a prompt file to reference from, that's why it's actually asking us the question, which would originally be answered within that prompt file. So the question is, what application do you want GPT Engineer to generate? Now, I'm going to keep it simple with the application and how intricate I want it to be. We're talking about very specific functionality. Now, this may make sense to you and I because we're familiar with what a Pomodoro app is. But having this prompt written out in this fashion, where we are giving direct, precise objectives, but saying it in a very general sense, as if I was talking to a buddy of mine about an idea that I had, we will be able to see just how GPT Engineer goes about engineering this, no pun intended, before it starts the programming process. So without further ado, let's go and click enter. Let's see what starts happening. It should start generating right off the bat. Cool. Okay, so here we go. Let's start by creating the main application file, which will be the entry point for our application. I'm not going to read out all of this, but right away it starts programming. Looks like it's imported tkinter as I've requested it to. Also the message box from tkinter. We have the start, pause, stop, and stats button. That's interesting. So we can already see that it's taken the creative liberty of creating a show stats button, something that I didn't ask it to do. Show stats looks like it will show you the work sessions completed, stopped, the breaks taken, the total work time and total break time. That is exactly what we requested, by the way. Seems like it's done with the main file. Now it's creating the Pomodoro timer. It initializes all of these variables. It defines what starting does, pausing, and stopping. And of course, it gives the get stats definition as well. Now it's creating a requirements.txt, which is empty, by the way. I suppose it does that as a hard-coded precaution. And now it's telling me to just execute the code and hopefully it works. Let's see. Let's do a yes. And there it is. It's very small, of course, but it exists nonetheless. So from a prompt, we now have an application. Now, of course, it's nothing extraordinary. It's not beautiful in any way. It's not designed whatsoever. It just has literally what we wanted it to have. Let's see if the functionality works. So let's click start and see what happens. So I just clicked it and nothing is happening. No visuals are showing up. Nothing is happening within the command line. Let's see what show stats does. So here we have the stats that we asked it to do. Still, all of them are 0. Let's pause and see what happens. Any changes to the stats? Yes. So now, since we've paused it, it seems to have updated the total work time that we have. It seems to me that this is in seconds, and for some reason it trails over the seconds immensely. Now let's see if we stop it, that should register it as a work session. It doesn't seem like it does. Needless to say, this is not a high quality Pomodoro timer app, but it is definitely a place to start, especially when you keep in mind that this took us, what, 10 seconds to write out a description of the program that we want. So I'm going to exit out of this And what we're going to do now is look into the prompt itself. So within the example directory that it's created, we have the prompt. So let's open this up. And as you can see here, let me make this a little bit bigger. This is exactly what the answer that we gave to the question of what do you want this program to do. It's now saved here within the prompt file. Just so that it's easier to separate these things, I'm going to show you what the file structure looks like right now. We have the environment directory, of course, which is where our Python environment is in, as well as the projects directory with the example directory inside of it, and then all of our code that was generated by GPT Engineer. What we're going to do here is, let me quit out of this. What we're going to do here is inside of the current directory, we're going to make a new directory called Aider version. So this will just let us keep everything in a more organized state. And now within this new directory, we are just going to type in Aider. So the first thing that happens is Aider tells us that there's no Git repo found, and it's asking if we want to create a Git repo to track the GPT's changes. And it says it's recommended. So we're of course going to type yes. You can see the model is GPT-4 by standard. I don't want to get too specific into the details of what all this means, what a repo map is, etc. I'm just going to show you how it works. So all we're going to do now that we are within the Aider tool, you can see here by the green marker here, we're going to paste in the same exact prompt that we originally had with GPT Engineer into this Aider instance. Now let's just press enter and see what happens. Right off the bat, it's typing out somewhat similarly to what GPT Engineer did, but this is a little more intricate in my opinion. It's labeling out all of the features, and now it's starting the programming process. So similar to the GPT Engineer version, it imports tkinter, establishes the Pomodoro app, and I can tell you right off the bat, it does seem a bit more complex than what we had from GPT Engineer. You can also see here what's highlighted, the comment portions where it says to be implemented. That means it hasn't implemented those pieces yet. At the end of the file generation, it's told us, as you can see here, this is just the skeleton of the application. The methods, and it lists the method names, need to be implemented. Please confirm if you want to proceed, and I will provide the implementation for these methods. So of course, it asks us as well if we want to create the new file that was generated up here, pomodoro.py. And again, we're just going to press yes. It applies the edits to Pomodoro. It creates a commit. So now all we got to do is just type in continue. So while this is being generated, you can see right away that this is a way more conversational way of programming, where GPT Engineer kind of does its best to complete whatever task you've set out for it to do with just a one-time go at it. Aider instead does it step by step, piece by piece, asking for your input, or at the bare minimum, asking for it to be allowed to continue, making sure that you like what it's generated so far. All right, that was quite a large chunk of code that it just generated. Let's see what it says at the end here. It says, these changes implement the timer functionality and the tracking of work sessions, breaks, and total time. The timer updates every second when it's running, and it automatically switches between work time and break time when it reaches 0. The stats are updated every time the timer is stopped or reaches 0. And that's exactly what is said within the commit itself. So let's ask, is it done? Can I run it? Very similarly to how I would ask an assistant. And it says, yes, you can run the pomodoro.py file. It should work as expected based on the code you've provided. Cool. So that's all we got to do now. So let's exit out of Aider and do exactly what it told us to do. Python pomodoro.py and see what happens. Boom. We have an application. I wish I could make this a bit bigger, but hopefully you can see. I'll zoom in when I'm editing so you can see what this application looks like more specifically. Here, I'll zoom into that. And so this is our application. And now let's see what happens when we click start. The timer automatically begins. Let's see what happens when we click pause. The timer pauses. That's pretty good functionality so far. Let's see what happens when we click stop. Seems like it resets it into a 5-minute timer instead. I believe this is now a break. So let's do the break. Break starts just fine. Let's see what happens when we click stop. It ends the break and goes back to the main work timer. So if we click stop multiple times, it switches over from the break version to the work version of the timer. And you can see here the interrupted sessions are building up. Now, again, this is no way a perfect application, but you have to keep in mind, once again, we've generated this off of nothing more than this text. That's all. This text created the two applications that we've looked at so far. So, in my opinion, now that you've seen everything and should probably make the same judgment as I'm about to make, Aider wins by far. It's a way more natural conversation. You don't have to go back and edit the prompt file every single time you want to adjust something. And all in all, for the same amount of time that it took to produce the two results, we are left with two very different applications in terms of functionality and general design from the get-go. Thank you for watching, and I will see you tomorrow.